Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here at the Milt Talk Podcast. I'm Jack Stroman, and I'm here with my co-hosts Warner Williams, Agoy Mbima, and Jessica Corrado-Platt. We all graduated from a private boarding school that was founded by the chocolate mogul Milton Snavely Hershey and his wife Catherine. In this show, we'll be talking with some of the former students, their family members, and loved ones, in addition to former employees, teachers, and administrators who all worked there at some point in time. We'll get to hear their stories in their own words, and it's our hope and wish that you'll hear something in these stories that you can relate to, whether you went to the school or not. Enjoy.
Meshed with the Milt.
That's right.
Service as well. That was beautiful. It was gorgeous. I really enjoyed it.
I could live that day over again. Not that I want to, but I mean, it was special.
I was happy to be there in a number. My favorite moment is when you saw one of our friends and you said, "What a great athlete! What a great football player you are!" And his name was Ralph. And you said, "Okay, Roger, see you later." And it wasn't the fact that you thought he was, because I knew he wasn't a fantastic football player.
Who, Ralph?
So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Ralph Davis was a good football player.
Just mediocre. But just throw that out there. I want to send that out to Paul Azanero so you got it.
All right, so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, guys, because I know we're going to get into it. It's tough having Mr. Whitman here, not wanting to get
Mr.
into it.
Whitman,
you know what I mean?
The guy.
You see what you bring, the energy, just having you here?
Yeah, man.
So, welcome back, everybody. We're at Milt Talk Podcast. We are just up here in Hershey, and we have a couple fantastic guests. Right now, we have Don Whitman. Yeah.
Mr. Whitman.
Mr. Whitman.
No.
He still looks the same.
Yeah, he does.
Mr. Whitman has not aged 1 year. He looks exactly the same
Yeah.
from 1986.
So for some of us, he was our principal
Better believe
in middle school, which was known as Catherine Hall at the time. And I just want to start this off with, "It's a beautiful day in Hershey, PA," which was not your line. No. It was Mr. Durant's line. But, you know, again, just thinking of that era and that time and bringing it all back and how we would start the day with that. And it's trippy. It's great to be here. It's great to have you here. And we're
Thank you for coming, Mr. Whitman. For
absolutely.
real.
Great to be here.
Thank you very much.
I'm honored.
Well, we're honored to have you. Like we were telling you, this is just us talking and storytelling and going down memory lane and talking about the school. It's going to be a little bit different with you because almost everybody we've had, I think, so far was an alumni, including Mike Weller, whereas you were an administrator. And so it's going to be a little different. So I wanted to start off by asking you, when did you start at Milton Hershey School?
I came to Milton Hershey in 1958.
Okay.
I was in the Marine Corps for 3 years after high school, went to Easttown College, and my senior year, I walked into the administration office, and Dr. Hershey, the president of the school, was there to visit the new dean, and he was asking about certain teachers that he might be available, and the dean said, "Well, here's the one I recommend." So I met Dr. Hershey that day, and I never really had a formal interview. In fact, they didn't even have a job for me. They created a job. They took 18 of the most needed disciplined students in 8th grade.
Well put. Well put, Mr. Whitman. Well put.
And they gave them to me as a one-room school type teacher. I had them all day except for music, gym, and health and art. So it was a great year. I told the students at the end of that year, "I didn't teach you much, but you sure taught me a lot." And that was the beginning of my career.
You said Dr. Hershey?
Dr. John Hershey.
Dr. John Hershey.
Right.
Was he
He was the president of the school.
a president of school?
He
Okay.
might have retired prior to your coming here. Was Mr. Achel the
Mr. H.O.
Yeah,
I remember
right.
Dr.
Well,
H.O.
Dr. Hershey retired and Mr. Achel took over.
Got it.
That's
Got
it.
it. So what was your official position?
I came as I was a reading coordinator. My specialty was in remedial reading, and I worked with all the students who had difficulty because of a developmental lag. Maybe didn't go to school regularly and got behind in reading, so I worked with them. I was in that job for 7 years, and I also coached wrestling. I became
I didn't know that either.
when Andy Kovac, the head wrestling coach, retired. I was his assistant for 3 years, and then for the next 3 years, I became the varsity coach. So I was teaching and coaching at the same time, and at the same time, living on a student home as the assistant house parent.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So that's interesting because you just covered probably 3 of the most important positions at the Milt over the years. So, like, could you just list some of the things over the years besides those? What student homes you were helping at?
Okay, well, when we came to the school, we were assigned to move into student home Manada. Manada was across the Swanee, north of Hershey, behind the hotel. And we had 24 intermediate 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. That was the first year the intermediate student homes existed. Huh. That's when the intermediate division began. And they had about four or five intermediate homes. We did not have the dairy. We were out in the country, but we didn't have the dairy. So we were there for 4 years as assistant house parents. And then I was teaching and also coaching. Okay. So it was a busy time.
Are you still in contact with any of the students that you had?
Oh my, yes, a lot of them.
Really?
Oh my, a lot of them.
Give me some names.
Well, just recently, Matt Klein was one of my wrestlers who went on to Penn State, and he was Eastern District champ, in the nationals. He was 4th place. He just had a lung transplant, and I went down to Washington D.C. to see him, and I get phone calls from people from California and different places. Yeah.
It's got to be. You've had so many students over the years pass through the doors under buildings and places that you were in charge of. It's got to be difficult to remember the names, and I'm surprised you remember any of them because there's so many. And
it's interesting. When I was working in a school, I basically knew every name of every student.
Yeah,
but
especially mine.
if you don't use it, you lose it.
Right.
But it's amazing that the further out graduates I remember better than the closer graduates. Yeah, they just come back. But I just absorbed myself in the school. I just loved the school. I just felt it was a special privilege to be able to work at Milton Hershey, and I just took it more or less as a calling rather than a job.
So how did you hear about the school?
Well, as I said, when I walked into the administrative building at E-Town College, mm-hmm. the president was there talking to the dean.
Okay.
And he approached me.
Got it.
The only connection I ever had about the school was, I went to Manheim Central School. We had a wrestling team.
Great wrestling, yeah.
Milton Hershey had a wrestling team, and we wrestled. And that's the only connections that I ever knew. I didn't know much about the school. In fact, I didn't realize what I was getting into, really.
Well, It sounds like it was meant to be.
It was. As I said, I feel it was a calling more than anything. I mean, it was meant to be.
Well, I know we're all thankful that we had you as a principal and that you were involved at the Milton. I mean, you can just tell by our reaction how much of an impact you had on us, just being who you are. So thank you for that. And I'm going to talk about, we were talking earlier about Mike Weller. Mike was one of our first interviews, and, actually Bob just left to go help Mike move. For those who don't know, Mike has a health issue right now, and we're just sending him a whole lot of love. But you spoke really highly of Mike Weller, and I didn't realize you guys even worked together. Can you tell us about your relationship with Mr. Weller?
I started at the middle school. I started at the junior high school level. When Milton Hershey School had the junior program and the high school program. The junior high and the high school were together up on the hill. So I was working in the junior high school program, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And then when we opened Catherine Hall, Dr. Hershey asked if I would be willing to consider being the principal. You talk about being set back. That was a shock that he would even think of me, because I was only here 7 years. And I said, if you believe in me and you think I can do it, I'll say yes, whatever you think. So I was fortunate in 1966 when we opened Catherine Hall. I became the principal with Mr. Duran and as the director of the program.
So Mr. Duran started at that time too?
Mr. Duran, he was the director of the intermediate division. Okay. Home and school. Mm-hmm. I was his assistant in education. Mr. Cooper was his assistant in home life.
Good old Mr. Cooper.
And so when did Mike Weller come into play down?
So then in 1985, Mr. Hoover, I don't know if you knew Mr. Hoover, was the director of the junior program. He retired, and I went to Mr. Fisher, who was the president at the time, and I said, I never asked for anything as far as a position. I'm very happy where I was, but I always thought I would really enjoy being involved in the elementary school. So Mr. Fisher gave me the opportunity to be the director of the junior program, where I was in charge of student homes and house parents, and his teachers. And Mr. Weller was the director of home life, so he was my boss.
Wow.
The best administrator you could have. So calm, understanding, patient, good listener, good communicator, very good supportive person. Yeah, Mr. Weller was outstanding administrator and a teacher and coach.
Absolutely.
We talked about his ability to see it from both sides, having been a Milt and a homeboy, which is one part of it, but it's also your personality as well. So, I think he was perfect for. You hear everybody talk about it, and every one of these names that we talk about, you, Bob, Mike Weller, Mr. Fisher has been brought up many times. Everybody's looking out for everybody, and it's always in the best interest of the school and the students. And I just think that's a testament to, to the Milt family. So, yeah.
I think we're all very appreciative. Everybody here.
Well, one of the things as I look back, I didn't realize it at the time, but I think Dr. Hershey put me in position as assistant house parents, so I would become familiar with the home and the school. And then when the intermediate division opened, I think that was his reason for offering me the principalship. I was stunned. I was shocked. I had the best wrestling team that I coached next year. I had to give that up. But I will say this: my last year coaching, we couldn't go with the PIAA. We had to go to Lehigh for the National Prep School Championships. We couldn't participate in playoffs for the public schools. Back then, we had to go with the private schools. So we went down to Lehigh for the National Prep School Tournament, came home with 2 champions, the outstanding wrestler, and we won the tournament.
Yeah.
Nice.
That was my last year.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a good way to go.
Yeah. That's it. You have a unique perspective, having seen the school for over a half century grow. And something you said to me just earlier is you're happy with the direction and some of the choices that they've been making. Can you tell us what you've been seeing, or specifically some of these changes that you like?
I can. I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Well, first of all, when I first came to school, I dealt with students who were really struggling, frustrated. House parents really didn't understand many of the needs for the children, because so many of them were focused on cows, milking, the barn, farm work. And I didn't think we had enough focus on taking care of children, taking care of the needs of young people. And over the years, and this is one thing I appreciated with Mr. Duran, he tried to have the focus of looking out for the needs of children, not necessarily barn chores and that kind of thing. That's why the intermediate division was so special, because it gave before, when you hit 5th grade, moved into 6th grade, you went to the senior program, and the 6th graders became little miniature slaves to the older boys. There was a lot of bullying, there was a lot of subversion of older boys taking advantage of younger boys. And I was happy to see the middle school change when I was up in the hill for those 7 years. I saw the struggle of middle school boys had going into the farm homes.
It's too early for that.
And then we saw the intermediate division had a chance to change a lot of that. and it became more child-centered. It became more of an emphasis on students' personalities and their well-being and that sort of thing.
Okay. So something I didn't realize Pete has been president as long as he has already. And I don't know how much longer he can go, but what would you like to see get implemented that hasn't been yet?
Well, one of the things that when Johnny O'Brien came back, when he came back to become the president, he did something that Mr. Duran and I felt for many years the school should do, and that is have a transitional living program. We always felt, and when Mr. Duran would present his annual report, he always alluded to the fact that we should do something to help the transition out of the high school. And when John O'Brien established the transitional program, I thought that was a phenomenal change, where seniors didn't have to live under the headship of a house parent program. They had some more freedom, ready to step out into the world, understanding more on how to take care of laundry and finances and things like that. And the reason I felt so strongly about that, because many of the students would come back and tell me how lost they were the night after graduation. I mean, some came back and told me I had to sleep in cars. I didn't know where to go, and we always felt. I always felt from the way back when I first came, I thought this isn't right. I mean, we take care of people up to here, then boom, we dump them, and so that's one of the most wonderful changes that I think have made. And I think that also that the emphasis on academics, I think Pete's done a great job of increasing the academic program standards, testing standards and everything. Pete's doing an awesome job as president.
I agree. It's nice to see a homeboy in there who gets it.
That's right.
You know, like we were talking about with Mr. Weller. Same thing with Pete. Having his brother in here and getting that perspective was
I
really
think
cool.
I think if Mike Weller would have become president, he would have done just an equal job as Pete's doing.
Mm-hmm. I concur. I completely agree with that. I mean, again, being
Because he
able
had
to wear
that-
all those different hats and
That's
see
right.
things from the different perspective makes a world of difference.
And having the mindset to be able to do it, though. You know, like you said before, people being in positions doesn't make them good at that position. So I think the fact that Pete is in the position where he can thrive and the school can also thrive, I think that's very good for everybody involved.
One of the advantages that Pete has right now, that way back with Dr. Hershey and Mr. Rachel, Mr. Fisher, they didn't have quite the deep pockets of the pocketbook. I mean, Pete's dealing with a trust of about $14 billion, and I can remember the years where they said they weren't making the money off the interest, so the school didn't have as much money to do some things. But
That's an interesting point, because I always thought the trust had this endless amount of money. You know, when you're a kid, you don't really think about how much is there. You just think there's this endless amount of money. So that's an interesting point.
well, we can never forget that they don't have $14 billion to spend. They have the interest that's earned on the $14 billion, and you can have a lot of money on interest on $14 billion. But back, well, I'm talking about maybe the trust company was $5 million.
So it's a lot less to work with.
A lot less to work with.
Interesting.
And then when they start diversifying the stock market and everything, and they sold off stock, and they just did a lot of things that economically paid off for them. So Pete has the blessing of having a lot of money to work with. That doesn't mean he's a good president because of that. He's a good president because of who Pete Gert is.
And how he handles, yeah.
That's right.
It really does. Well, I'm going to pass it over to Warner now. Ask a couple questions, and we want to get everybody's questions in. And while we got you here, Mr. Will.
Here
What's up? This is Jack Stroman, class of 90, graduate of Milton Hershey School and co-host of the Milt Talk podcast. We dreamed of doing this show for a long time, and if you're like us, you enjoy hearing from Milts about their time at the school, please consider making a donation on our website. Visit milttalkpodcast.com to make a donation and help us realize the dream. That's milttalkpodcast.com, milttalkpodcast.com. Thank you.
So I don't have any specific questions, except, first off, I didn't know that the intermediate division wasn't always there. Like, I didn't know that. That's interesting, because we already, when we were talking with Bob, we all agreed that the intermediate division was the toughest division in the school, because that's the molding years where they're not, they start to, you'll get a lot more pushback from kids in the intermediate division than you will in the junior division and even the senior division to some extent, because they've already had to go through the intermediate division. So if you could tell us about how the intermediate division, I mean, you told us how it got started.
Okay, let me
but as far as,
let me just share. Excuse me. Way back in, when I came here in 1958, the school basically hadn't changed for 30 years. It was basically run the same way as it was way back in 1920, 25, 30, 40. It was all junior program, sixth graders moved to senior program, farm emphasis there. When Dr. Hershey became president of the school, and I'd say about 1955, now Dr. Hershey, may I just interject to him? Dr. Hershey came here as a house parent, head house parent, and he got his degree and became a counselor, and he worked his way up to become president of the school. But because he had that history of the home life and the problems that were there with the younger and the older students and the farm program, he saw the need to change. So in 1959, he had this group come in and evaluate the school. And the committee suggested, and instead of having 24 students in a student home, you reduce it to half, 12 to 14. So then Dr. Hershey took that recommendation and began the decade of the 60s. And during 1960 to 1970, the intermediate division was formed. The program, when I came in 58, 59, they started with 3 intermediate homes. And then in 58 and 59, they started building the intermediate homes out where you guys remember the program, around Catherine Hall. So then they built all those 5 clusters of homes around Catherine Hall. And then we built Catherine Hall. And then the last part of the decade of the 60s was Founders Hall. In 1970, we dedicated it.
So this is exactly why we're having you on, Mr. Whitman. I'm looking back on Milton Hershey School and how many things I just took for granted. I never understood why we had clusters. I never understood why we had 14 kids in the student home. I didn't understand. So thank you for clearing up a lot of this. I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely.
24 students in a home.
That's with just one set of house parents?
One set of house and a substitute.
And a substitute, right.
And the substitute was a farmhand.
Right.
The second help was a farm, and the house parents were head house parents. Right. But Dr. Hershey deserves so much credit for where the school is today. He was a visionary, and what was interesting about Dr. Hershey, he didn't only develop the decade of the 60s. At the same time, Hershey Park grew into what you know it is today, a closed, fenced-in park where you pay one admission, spend all day. He was in charge of that. He was also in charge of the HERCO program. I mean, he had his he was just a great organizer. And because of him, in the decade of the 60s, the school changed totally. We brought in more counselors, more house parents, more medical, more dental, everything increased. Yeah.
That makes so much sense. That makes a lot of sense. Just because, like I said, we all thought that now for me, I love the intermediate division, the softball marathon and playing king ball and all that. Like, I loved it. And I loved that all the student homes were right around the actual school,
right,
which is now Senior Hall, I believe.
Right. That's what it is.
Right.
It's Catherine Hall.
But you were there. So you said Catherine Hall wasn't built yet and Founders Hall wasn't built yet?
Right.
Wow.
That's crazy.
In 1959 is when they start building the student homes. And then in 1964, 65, they started removing the mountain. There was like a woods where Founders Hall, taking all the trees out, started digging pylons. And it took 4 years to build Senior Hall. And while we were in Catherine Hall at the time, so we saw it coming out of the ground and go up as high as a dome. That was excellent. And then in 1970, I think it was on Mr. Hershey's birthday, we dedicated Founders Hall.
Wow. So one more question, then I'll let somebody else speak. But did you ever get to meet Milton Hershey?
Never.
No.
Mr. Hershey died in 1945.
45. Okay.
And I didn't come to Hershey until 1958.
I don't know why I thought he died in the 70s. I don't know why. Yeah, it was pretty late, but okay. All right. What you got?
Let me just say, we talk about the intermediate division. Mr. Duran really was a great administrator for that. I mean, he really, there was no middle school. Actually, the middle school program educationally wasn't really started until in the 60s. So we were one of the first middle schools, not just intermediate division, but middle schools. When we built Catherine Hall, many people came to us to see what we're doing to start the middle school grades 6 through 8.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is Dr. Hershey's vision, but he took the recommendation of that advisory committee to make student homes smaller, build another school 6 through 8. But because Memorial Hall couldn't handle all, we took 5th grade through 8th grade. But normally a middle school was 6th grade through 8th.
Wow. That makes sense. Because there are middle schools now, like you said, start at 6th grade, but we always started at 5th. Oh, I'm sorry, you're blowing my mind right now with all this history. This is awesome. I got nothing.
I do. First of all, Goey Mbima class of 87. Just wanted to throw that out there. But you mentioned something that really, I feel like sometimes it can get lost in all of the bells and whistles of Milton Hershey School. And that was you said taking care of the needs of the children. And I feel like as an adult now I have my own kids and everything, I think that gets lost as far as Milton Hershey is concerned, because I feel like there's so many moving parts to the school. And to hear an administrator such as yourself talk about the importance of that, it just makes you feel like, wow, somebody really cared about me. And sometimes you lose sight of that when you're coming to the school, and you don't realize that somebody's thinking about that. And it's not just, filling the numbers or whatever they have to do or filling up the student homes, but somebody actually cared about you. And I want to thank you for that out loud, because sometimes
I personally want to thank you as well, Mr. Whitman, because you were one of the people that I always felt that if I had a problem, I could always come to you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And then you also talked about, and this is really one of the things that really gave me interest in even doing this podcast with Jackie and Warner, because he came to me and asked me about it many years ago. And I was like, well, I don't know. it wasn't initially a podcast. We were talking about a documentary, in which hopefully we may actually get into that piece, and maybe we'll be able to use some of this stuff for that. But you talked about the transitional living program. A lot of the questions that I like to ask the actual graduates of Milton Hershey is, and I talked to Bob about it today, was, how did you feel when, whatever it was, June the 6th or June the 2nd or whatever day it was, and you've been there for, some guys have been there since kindergarten twice. And then there's a day when it's all over and they say bye, and now you're sleeping in your car. Some people didn't have homes to go back to, which I feel like, dang, nobody really taught. I mean, most of the people that I was friendly with went home. They had a mom, or they had somebody, grandmother or uncle or aunt that they could go stay with. But I'm saying some of them very short lived. And Bob talked about some kids that he was, some graduates who they got to stay at his house for 3 weeks, and then they had to go fend for themselves. 3 weeks isn't really a lot of time to get your stuff together, because all we're thinking about at that point was graduating. So that, I feel like that transitional living program was very, you talked about things I feel like that are important.
Goey, may I just interject? Back when I first came to school, certain students, if they were a certain discipline level, when they turned 18, they were out, even if they didn't graduate. I mean, that was cruel. I've seen that with a number of young men who were asked to leave because the agreement early in the school's history was 18 years old. They didn't have to keep you past 18. But Dr. Hershey had a lot to do with changing all those standards. But talking about the benefits of transitional living, to also back when I first came, I had a wrestler who was deeply in love with his sweetheart here in Hershey, and he wanted to stay to see her graduate. But the school said, you must leave the campus in 24 hours. You could not remain in Hershey, which I thought was ridiculous. I said, come home and live with us. So we kept him. It was illegal. It was we were in the student home, but I thought, this isn't right. Why can't that young man stay and see his girl graduate?
Right.
So we never got in trouble for it. And maybe they didn't find out about it, but that's an example of how I feel what they're doing now for seniors stepping out into the world is so beneficial. It's so good.
Well, thank God we had you. I mean, that's what family does. That's what we needed because there was no program. That little bit, the little bit that Bob did, I mean, that could have saved a life, and a lot of what this is about is talking about these stories. We were just making it through, I'm learning about Dr. Hershey and how much he changed the school. Literally the fabric of my Milton Hershey school experience. You just explained most of it. And I thought I knew a lot. I don't apparently know anything.
I was fairly versed.
Right. That's the beauty. That's why we wanted to have you in. So, I mean, so thankful you're able to share this stuff with us. So
I did have another question. I wrote some stuff down because otherwise I'll forget. So how was your relationships with the house parents? Did you have, I know I have a teacher night with my daughter, her teachers. Did that happen in Milton Hershey? Where the house parents, I guess, was there a night where the house parents got to talk, the teachers and stuff talked with the house parents about their students, or how did that work? Because was that in there anywhere?
I think the answer is yes and no. It depended on who the house parents were,
okay,
and who the teachers were. With some, the interaction with teachers and the students and their grades and all that kind of thing were very, very special. With others, it might not have been quite what it should have been. The opportunity was there. I tried my best to have the house parents and the teachers knowing what's going on, but it didn't always work because of personalities,
Yeah. Right.
It's anything. That's right.
So I got one last thing before I pass it over. And I want to thank you because you made sure I got my spelling done. I mean, I didn't understand what getting your spelling homework was done, but there was a saying called, "You want to be a hot dog? I'll warm your buns." So I mean,
I thought Sean Johnson was the only one who knew that.
Oh no! I learned it firsthand a few different times.
You're just bringing up something that I think almost every week, sometime through the night, I ask God to forgive me for not being as kind of guy as I should have been.
No, I think that was it. Listen, that was everything as far as I'm concerned, because it taught you, in my opinion, that there's consequences, and it doesn't necessarily mean you weren't doing anything really ridiculous. I mean, there's some things out there that are ridiculous, but there's consequences in your life. And so it taught us early on, you don't get that work done. And I feel great about it. I mean, I feel like that's nothing. It wasn't extreme. There's some extreme things that I've heard. Like you weren't, waterboarding us or anything like that. It's just one of those things. I think it's a great thing.
So, Mr. Whitman, did you have any, were you in the senior division, besides when you first came, and I know that you said that you were doing, you said that the senior division or the senior hall at that point had both the junior high and the senior high. So besides that, were you ever involved with anything in strictly senior division? Because I know we were talking, and it was mostly intermediate division.
Was through wrestling.
Just wrestling.
When I was a wrestling coach, that was basically because my teaching was 8th grade and down.
Okay.
It wasn't 9th grade or up.
Okay.
I did work with a number of special needs students who had difficulty with reading in the high school level, but that was a minority compared to what I had.
So you say special needs. My question is this, because I know when we went to the school, we all had to take IQ tests to get into the school. Do you know if that was in effect when you first came?
Oh, yes.
It was?
Yes. The IQ measurement was definitely a big role. In other words, when I came, the IQ was 93 was a cutoff.
Okay.
That was anything under a 93, if it was my understanding, was evaluated very carefully. Now, maybe special needs with someone who had a lower IQ might have made it through because of their circumstances in life. But generally speaking, the IQ of 93 was.
I think that's about.
So they did do it. Huh. Yeah, I think I skated in at a high 97, something like that.
You're higher than that. I know you are. I know you are.
No, but I didn't know that there was special needs. Did we have any special needs? I don't remember. Besides in our own way. I had some students that got into the high school, could barely read, and I worked with those students in 9th, 10th grade, but there was a few far between. Two of the students just had difficulty transferring from the page to their mind. Right.
They just couldn't handle it. But when it came to carpenter skills and things like that, they had ability. Yeah,
it's something
I just always remember Mr. Whitman was so positive all the time with us. Like, you'd be out at recess and be like, "Here comes Mr. Whitman! Whoa, let's go say hi." I mean, I don't know how many students in schools would be running up to their principal, like excited to see them. So that's just a tribute to the person you are.
Well, let me just say, as I said, when I came here, I felt an extra blessing and a privilege to be at Milton Hershey School. I saw the needs, and I just became totally absorbed, and I just loved the students. And the more difficult the student was, the more I loved them, even though you guys didn't think so.
No, I
remember I remember a young man who was a great basketball player, had such difficulty with his house father. He ready to play a game and put him on detentions, and teacher would give him a green failure slip. I tear him up sometimes and go play basketball. I took the brunt, but I loved the kids. I loved you guys, and I still do. And
we can tell.
Out of it all, I'm one of you. I'm an honorary.
You better believe it.
Yeah, you are.
The whole reason you're here. You know, I just got to ask you one quick question. Can you tell us a little bit about your wife? I know she's been super supportive of you all these years, being this honorary Milt and dedicating all your time to us. I mean, that's...
Yeah. Let me just say, I have a very, very special wife in that, as you say, she supported me to the very end. When we first came, I came here in August, I'll say the 22nd, because school started the day after Labor Day. So I had to come back. She had a baby. She was pregnant, didn't have her baby until September. So I was on the student home. When she had the baby, I brought her down to 24 boys, assistant house parents. She had no idea what Milton Hershey School was. She had absolutely no idea what she was getting into. So she became the assistant house mom to 24 boys. She had an infant. Dr. Hershey asked me if I take the special reading program, if I get my master's degree. So while we were second help, teaching, coaching wrestling, I was going to Temple University for my master's degree.
Shout out.
And I leave on a Saturday morning at 5:30 to go down to Temple. She had to get 24 boys out of bed, work them through their chore program and everything else. I come back home by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and she had the boys all day Saturday. And this was her. And when I was coaching wrestling, she was right with me. When I became principal of middle school, she was right there with me. I couldn't have done it without her. She was such an encouragement. Her mother and dad were special people in my life as well. So, hey, you know what? You're not looking at someone who did it on his own. I had a lot of support.
Well, that's why we're here, because we didn't do this on our own at all.
Yeah.
Like getting through the Milt, like we were talking about before, that was a group effort. Because if you didn't have that support system, if you didn't have people like Mr. Whitman and Mr. Weller and Mr. Duran looking out for our best interests, then we would have, not made it, to be blunt about it. So the support system that you speak of, I'm right there with you.
Do you remember Catherine Hall? Beautiful building, carpeted floors, music playing in the hallways.
Clearly.
I mean, it was a gorgeous building. And I just felt it was my responsibility to help young people realize that, hey, this is only yours for 4 years.
Yeah. Take
You're only passing through. So leave it as it was when you got here. And so maybe that's why I was tougher than maybe I should have been. I don't know.
I really want you to stop beating yourself up, because it's important that you understand and feel this energy that I'm going to go out on a limb and speak for all Milts that had you in one way or another and say thank you. We've said thank you a bunch of times, but you have nothing to apologize for.
Not at all.
Thank you to you. Thank you to Miss Whitman. Like, we were able to grow up and be somewhat stable because of you. Guys, you know, like that's what this whole thing is about, is explaining to the world, how special this school is. There's nothing typical about our school. We're more American than apple pie. This is how it should be. That's how I look at it, so I'm getting a little worked up.
And again though, it's a testament to your character too, because like Jack said, we interviewed a bunch of former Milts, homeboys, alumni, and that's their or our story. But your character, and like you said, it was destiny kind of for you. But it brought you to the school, and it was almost like you were meant to be there.
Right.
you know. So, but it's a testament to your character. So don't beat yourself up at all. You fit right into the framework of what the Milt is all about. So thank you.
Well,
I got one other thing, because I guess this was, I don't know, I think it was sometime early 8th grade. I had been around for a long time at that point, maybe 6 months or so, give or take. And I was walking down the hall, and I don't necessarily know if I was supposed to be walking down the hall at that particular point. And you said, Goey, come here. And I was like, oh my God, I know I'm in trouble. So, right. So you call me in the office. So we go in and we sit down in your office. And you said to me, so how are things going? And I really wasn't ready for the question, because I was like, things are going great till you stop me in the hallway. But it was a concern, because I was relatively new, and you took an opportunity just to talk to me, just basic conversation. And I never forgot that. And it was like, wow. Just wanted to,
check in.
Yeah, just to see like how I was in, like what was going on, what student home I was in, how was that going? And that was
interest.
Yeah, and that was a tough, at that point, I really was I really wasn't as excited about Milt and Hershey as I am today. And certain little small things like that allowed me to keep going, because I called my mom every day, tell her to get me out of here. At that point when I was at school. So
did I take you to novice wrestling?
To where?
To the novice wrestling tournament. Were you part of that?
I wasn't a part of that.
You weren't a part of that. Okay.
But
I didn't know if I used to take the junior high students into Hershey had an Optimist Club had a wrestling tournament, and I used to take 5th, 6th, and 7th, 8th graders into that. I didn't know if you were one of my guys.
No, I wasn't wrestling, but
no, I didn't wrestle.
It was a great opportunity, I think.
Mr. Whitman, I'm just we're tailing down here a little bit. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say something to the people, if there's a story or if there's something you want to relay to folks about the school that hasn't been talked about yet. I just wanted to give you a chance to do that. Anything you can think of or anything on your mind that we haven't gone over?
Well, we covered quite a bit. I think to communicate to the alumni who graduated from the school, it was very, very natural back then to not really appreciate everything that you had, that you can look back on, that you have now as a gift from Mr. Hershey and all that, because of the way this school was structured. I just feel strongly that we failed in many ways with caring for the needs of students like we should have. Like today, I mean, I shouldn't have paddled students. I know that.
I disagree.
I disagree.
But I mean, there are times that I could have been more loving, more caring. I think we had some house parents that were excellent. We had some house parents who didn't really take the care of the students seriously enough. And I think some students left the school, they never come back. They're angry because of the way they were mistreated. And I just ask God to forgive me if I'm the one who caused someone to be bitter or upset with the school, because that's not what I was all about.
Well, I love you, so I don't want to disagree with you, but I just want to reiterate, and this is really important. For every one of those students that feels that way, there's 2,000 that feel the exact opposite. I'm serious, Mr. Whitman. You just heard this. He remembers the quote, warm my buns. And we deserve that. We needed that structure. So, because we've been talking about our mothers, how they feel guilty about sending some of us to school. I go through this with my mom. I should have never sent you there. And I said, I understand. So if I forgive you, you have to forgive yourself. And I'm going to give you that as well.
Oh, thank you.
You've done more good than you haven't. It's the simplest way that I can put it.
Well,
Absolutely.
And we appreciate you. We thank you for coming on. And
thanks for sharing the stories.
Thanks for sharing.
And all the history. That history
thank you.
is rich.
Don Whitman, everybody.
Thank you.
Follow us on Instagram at Milt_podcast, the Facebook Milt space pod, Twitter Milt_podcast, and at email miltpodcast@gmail.com.
We encourage you to follow us on our social media outlets and chime in and comment, ask questions, help us remember names, places, events. Just give feedback. But most of all, just get engaged. We want to hear from you.
Your mom's already there.